Welcome to another episode of Preparing for the Unexpected. I'm your host, Alex Fullick, and as always, we like to talk about things related to disaster recovery, business continuity, COVID, resilience, well-being, anything that helps you, your organization, or your community prepare for, respond to, and overcome adverse situations. If you'd like to be a guest on the show, please feel free. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm the only Alex Fullick there. I'm really easy to find, and I do respond to everything I get. Alternatively, you can find me at alexfullick.com. Today, I have a guest who I've been trying to get on the show for a while, but because of my own silliness, forgetfulness, I keep forgetting to reach out. But finally, after following him on LinkedIn and reading posts and articles, I finally got him on the show. So I want to welcome, and I hope everybody knows who he is, Shane Mathew. Shane, it's great to have you on the show. Welcome.
Thank you, Alex. I'm excited to be here. And no worries, we understand, or I understand the challenge of scheduling and how things work in the podcast business to some extent, but certainly glad to be here.
Great. Now, I know who you are and what you do. Could you take a minute or two and just tell us a little about yourself, what you do, and how you got into this crazy industry of ours?
Yeah, absolutely. Everybody I've talked to in this field always tends to have a very interesting or oblong way of how they got to this point in their career, right? Or this profession. And I share the same thing. I actually started in public health, of all things. I graduated with a master's degree. And when I did, I ended up working in a public health organization for local government. And in that capacity, I did things like health inspections for local restaurants. But along the way,
You're one of them.
Yeah. I can tell you which restaurants not to go into at this point, right? But along the way, I took a chance and I joined a CDC-funded grant for the local health department around bioterrorism preparedness, and that was around the anthrax attacks here in the United States in the early 2000s, and subsequently, I grew in that program and started to learn all about business continuity, crisis management, emergency response as part of preparedness for a biological attack. And that opened the door for me into business continuity. And so I joined a couple of local organizations as the lead for business continuity. So I worked in government, I worked in pharmaceuticals, I worked in healthcare, specifically like hospitals. And now, in just the last few years, I started diving into more consulting, which exposed me to a variety of industries where I got to do this type of work there for these various clients. So I work with Netflix and Gulfstream and manufacturing organizations like Uline. So there was a variety of tastes I started to get. The stars aligned, and I was able to work with a world-class organization, many of you know, called Zoom. And here I am in the last year working on building a business continuity, disaster recovery, and crisis management program for Zoom video communications. And it's been exciting to be able to take all the stuff I've been learning over these years of working in this profession and applying it to almost a blank slate here at Zoom, getting to kind of craft my philosophy around business continuity practices and apply that here. So it's been quite a whirlwind, but I'm really lucky to have found something I really enjoy doing and now get to do it for great organizations.
Great, and I'm glad you're here. And funny enough, we're on a Zoom call now.
All product placement going on here, unfortunately.
So the bosses should be.
Yes, I'm getting thumbs up here on the side.
So we have a couple of, actually 3 topics we're going to talk about today, and we're probably going to do 3 different segments. And the first one is a really key piece right now because a lot of people are talking about it, and that's developing metrics in business continuity. So first of all, what kind of metrics should we even have for business continuity? Because I think traditionally, a lot of people think you have a BCP plan, tick there, and that's it.
Right. Yeah, this is a great question. And over the years, I've had my own experiences building metrics. I've seen others and other organizations do their version of it. It reminds me of the movie Office Space, where I don't know if you've seen that, Alex, but there's a scene in which the main character is asked by some business consultants, hey, what do you do exactly for the company? And I think that kind of set the tone for me to think, well, is that what we're looking at when we think of metrics? So there's several categories of metrics I've found over the years. And one in particular that a lot of people take advantage of is the what do you do metric. And I use that as the terminology to kind of describe, hey, what are the specific business resilience program or business continuity program tasks that you're doing? There's going to be things like, how many BIAs are you doing? How many business continuity plans have you built? How many different, application disaster recovery plans have you built? So again, it's just like, what are you doing with your time, Shane? Tell us what that thing is, right? Mm-hmm. So that metric is oftentimes the only thing people measure. And this ties to a kind of a broader subject that's like a passion project for me, which is the idea of brand value. So like a lot of times I realized when I was building programs, I was not thinking about what is the perception of my program outside of me and my boss, right? So there's a lot of influencers in the decisions ultimately around whether your program is successful or not. You are not the only decision maker on that, unfortunately. If that were the case, I would always be on the winning side here. But we have to take a step out and say, okay, well, does the what do you do metrics really improve your overall brand perception about your program? Do people really care that you've completed 38 BIAs this quarter or that you've done 15 tabletops? Do they really care about that? And I found that if you just center your time in the what do you do metrics, you are not going to be successful long term. It's just the challenge we face as practitioners to think beyond, hey, I'm getting all these things done. The thing is, as a practitioner, you have to also think about, hey, what's the perception? And is the work I'm doing being communicated in a way that the perception about my program is also being improved over time?
So what kind of things should we measure then? Because if say 15 tabletops or 38 BIA reviews really means nothing to people, then what will mean something to them?
Right. So, I want to be clear that I think those data points are important to an extent, but you also have to look at other ways to measure progress. So another measurement that I have started using is the category I call, are we good at this metrics? Okay. Metrics like that are really, they're about vulnerabilities and reducing vulnerabilities. They're about the business case overall for why you have the program in the first place. So I'll give you an example. I was one time brought in to a company to build a business continuity program because they had a major failure of one of their sites. There was a hailstorm. It crushed the skylights in the building, flooded everything, and the whole call center had to be shuttered. And immediately they had all these phone calls coming in and they were not being received, right? Because the building was just in shambles. So that's what I was brought in for, right? So if I come in and immediately just start to say, hey, I've built business continuity plans or I've done tabletop exercises, that's great. But there's a lot of interest in, well, have you solved the vulnerability that you were brought in on the first place for, right? So, did I develop a list of vulnerabilities for our sites that we are now working to solve? How much do they cost to resolve? What's the priority? those are tangible results that I could be measuring and reporting on that are far more important in that scenario than, did we get enough of our tabletops done this quarter, right? So the are we getting better metric to me should also include things like your vulnerability remediation, what things are left outstanding, what's not, what's been resolved, what's been fixed. These are all things that you could be spending time on. So there's examples like the total number of vulnerabilities that you have, their age, how long have they been known as a vulnerability, and have you remediated them? What's your remediation rate? The number of high risk assets that you have in place currently versus the next time you come around, did that number go down? And so there's a whole bunch of definitions and remediation steps you can take to show improvement when you're looking at metrics in that realm, as opposed to just saying, hey, I did 50 more BIAs this week, or this month, right? There's just a different sense of data that comes out across the pages when you look at, are we getting better?
I have a project management background as well. And the way you just described it got me thinking of testing. When you're implementing something new and you're testing and you identify all these defects and what's your defect remediation rate, what's your burn down, and all these different terms that quality assurance uses in their testing. And it sounds a little bit like you can adopt that kind of a framework to business continuity.
Absolutely. And I think you touched on a point too about the type of information that you're conveying could also or should also be developed based on the audiences you're trying to support, right? So a lot of times we think executives are my only audience. So therefore, I'm going to talk about all the stuff I'm doing that's making it worthwhile for me to be here, right? But the reality is there's also other audiences that may benefit from reviewing your metrics. So you bring up remediation rates. For me, that was our internal audit team was very interested in, are you fixing and remediating problems you've identified or we've identified as audit just a few months ago? Did you fix those yet? They're very concerned about that. So that audience should be reflected in your metrics as well, right? Executives, one of the biggest questions I would get from executives is like, hey, are we any better off than we were just a year ago, Shane? Do you have some sort of way to show that our ROI for this program was worthwhile? Because, preparedness, you can never really, it's a hard sell to always say, yeah, I'm prepared. Selling insurance is a very challenging job, right? So it's in the same realm. Business resilience is a hard sell. So you have to be able to identify ways that different audiences would value your metrics too, because that's equally important to exactly what you're measuring too.
I know I mentioned quality assurance, QA, and testing, but I guess you could also link some of these, and correct me if I'm wrong, some of these metrics to other processes like incident management, because we have business continuity in place and all these different mitigation steps or contingency plans or whatever you want to call it in place. Out of these 100 incidents that were recorded last month, only 7 of them became bad or something, something like that.
Right. No, that's a good point. And in fact, incident management is an easy way for you to partner with another part of the org and demonstrate improvement. So one of the things I would do with the companies I work with was to look at the incident management volume as well as the time to resolve or reduce the severity of the incident, And so I could then, it's a little more challenging because you really need to have additional data to support those metrics reductions. But the point is, if you can show that your incident management time to recover is reducing and you can point out examples in your reporting that you do, man, it becomes such an easier story to paint for your executives that there is value in this program. We are getting benefit that we didn't imagine before.
You mentioned an interesting point there, time. How do we bring time into that? Because with many people, and we hear it all the time, they only ever get in front of executive once a year, maybe twice a year if they're lucky, if they don't get rescheduled.
Yeah.
How does time play a factor in metrics?
It does definitely, and you're talking about specifically the ability to display or convey this information that you're gathering to the right audiences, especially those that make decisions about your program livelihood in the future, right? So in my opinion, you cannot wait for those magic moments where you have just a dedicated audience listening to what you're saying. In fact, I found another colleague of mine in an organization I was working with. They were running a similar program to mine in terms of identification of risk. Okay. But I'm trying to be careful about giving away too much information without asking their permission. But the point is, they did this amazing thing where they, on a monthly basis, would bring together stakeholders that were involved in participating in their program, and they would just give a state of the month kind of overview, right? Okay. So it wasn't necessarily a business committee, a steering committee or anything like that. It was just a group of people, and whether they had 2 people show up or 10 people show up, there were some ways to encourage participation. But the bottom line was there was a free exchange of information and a very quick, hey, this is where we're at today, and this is where we want to go for this next month. It was very agile oriented in terms of the reporting. It was very helpful for people to see that. But I thought at first when he first started doing this that it would just peter out after a month or two. But the reality is they were quick meetings. They were not more than 15, 20 minutes, and they just hit on the topics and they were done. And that's consistently got information across the organization. And executives, they may not have attended every single one, though they were invited, right? They were then hearing the pulse and the value of the program from other mouths. It wasn't just that individual saying how great I'm doing. It was other individuals saying, yeah, I remember hearing that. That was good. I'm glad to hear that. And they were advocates for the program unknowingly. So I think there's you have to be creative. You have to be willing to try a lot of things in order to get this across, but you have to try.
I guess doing that 15-minute kind of approach too is showing your organization how well we are doing, because you used the phrase just a moment ago, how well I am doing.
Right.
And it
makes
a big difference.
It is a make difference. That brand of value is built not only on just your perception of the program, but others. So if you can gain alignment with stakeholders and ownership of your program is not just on your shoulders, it's quite a different approach than doing it the other way.
So back to the point of time, when should we start looking at what kind of metrics we should record? Once we've got everything in place and then we figure it out?
I would say I would advocate for kind of a phased in approach, right? So in year one, I look at it kind of like the freshman year of high school or something like that, right? You're learning the ropes, you're gaining information. And so your metrics are going to be more in the, what are we doing realm, right? But then as you move into the next phase of your programming, it could be corresponding to the second year, but, it doesn't necessarily need to be based on time. But as you move into that next phase, then the are we getting better metrics are far more helpful at that point. You've got a runway typically when you build a program out of a certain amount of time before executives or stakeholders look to you and say, hey, you've been here long enough now. We should be seeing some value at this point. In the first few months, most of the time, you have that runway where people give you the benefit of the doubt and just say, okay, there's some productivity happening. But eventually that needs to switch, and your metrics need to switch along with it.
Well, that was going to be my next question. Can we change our metrics as we go along?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. The metrics should be a reflection of your program's maturity. right? So at the beginning stages, they're very simple, but as you grow, there should be a change in the metrics. And it's up to you really in your organization's corporate structure on how metrics change. Sometimes organizations are like, hey, we got a set of metrics, we're going to monitor it for a year, and then we have an annual refresh. And that's okay. But the point is make sure you're not just checking the same thing or doing the same metrics every year on year. It's always good to improve and change.
Yeah, very much. Well, that's a great ending point, but I'll give you, do you have a minute or two, anything final you'd like to say about metrics? How about things we shouldn't do? How about that?
Well, I think overall, you should establish a methodology that works best for your organization. Some orgs are really into the specific how many widgets did you build kind of metrics, and that's okay. But I think you need to be really cognizant of what is going to improve the overall perception of your program. Too oftentimes, we as BC practitioners, we have good hearts. We want to see the needle move, and we oftentimes conflate that with activity, right? But I think the needle can also move and move further when you talk about and show how improvement is happening. What's the capability you had today that you didn't have last time or last week, right? So I would say the challenge that you should overcome is just getting stuck into that framework of, I just got to show productivity and people will recognize value after that. And in fact, it's flipped. You really have to show value. Productivity is important, but nobody in the midst of an emergency or in the time of budget review, do they ever say, man, I really wonder how many BIAs Shane did this year, because that's going to make a decision on whether I keep this program or not.
Yeah, that's true. On that note, we've come to the end of this part of our show, talking about metrics. Shane, thanks so much. I really appreciate what you had to say and sharing your expertise with us.
Glad to do it.
So everybody tune in for our next segment. We're going to talk about gamification, something I'm really excited about listening to. So everyone watching and paying attention, stay prepared, everybody. If you liked that video, thumbs up. If you didn't like that video, thumbs down. But leave me a message and let me know your thoughts. Of course, don't forget to subscribe. And in the meantime, stay prepared, everybody.